When we talk about international relations, we know one thing for sure, that there is no permanent enemy, there is no permanent friend, there is only one thing that is permanent, that is interest. And that is what exactly we are getting to see when we are looking at US. When we are talking about US has for a long time, and especially under the presidency of Donald Trump, has said that our PM is their friend. India is a strategic partner. India is very important. But they are not shying away to distort and put pressure on India to give into their ways. And this is another example of this very condition that US is placing, that Iran's Chabahar Port, which is a very strategic asset for India, is again in a questionable position. The sanction waiver that India had got from US and that was extended for 6 months is again in a questionable position. US has said that this 6 months extension was only given so that India could clear up its operation, but India has clearly put forth that we are not leaving our strategic asset, that is Chabahar Port. Hello everyone, welcome to Vajram and Ravi's Flash News. My name is Shubhangi Singh, and in today's session, we will not be just understanding about this situation of sanction waiver, where is India placed amongst this, but also that why Chabahar Port is so important for us, what is the importance related to it, and in the end, what are the implications of the given situation. So let us start with understanding that what exactly has unfolded. So as of now, when we are talking about Chabahar Port, we need to understand the whole crisis situation, that India has been given time to wind down operation. Why? Because US sanctions are in place. Now let us try to understand this whole story. Since President Donald Trump has come into the presidency of United States, what we have seen that he is using this pressurizing technique, and the technique and the tool that he is using is the sanctions, and not just sanctions but also tariffs. And this is not just targeted towards adversaries but also the partners, the allies, be it anybody in the scenario. When we are talking about Iran specifically, Iran and US have had a long-standing hostility, especially because of the nuclear program that is ongoing in Iran, and US does not want that. So US has had placed multiple sanctions on Iran to leave the economy paralyzed. And that is why if you talk about the ongoing Iranian crisis, the economic situation that Iran is, that is pretty much because of the sanction-laden economy. But at the same time, for India, we have to understand this Chabahar Port. If you look at the given location here, you will understand which is right very close to Gwadar Port, which is being facilitated and run by China in Pakistan. And this Chabahar Port's location becomes very important for us. Why? Because as we know, India and Pakistan are not on the best of the terms. So there is no way we will get entry into Afghanistan via this particular country. When we are talking about the other route, that is via Central Asia, that is also not facilitated because of the presence of POK right here. So this has been always a restricting point for India, and that is why back in May 2024, India signed up an agreement with Iran that okay, we will be investing in this Chabahar Port, we will be the one developing it, and we will be using it as an access point not just for Afghanistan. This route is part of INST. That is International North-South Transportation Corridor. So this provides access into Central Asia, Russia and also Europe. So this was something that was built by India strategically for keeping an alternative and keeping in check China's presence right here. So that was a very strategic thing that was done by India. Now because Iran was being burdened with sanctions from US, India had got a sanction waiver from US in this context, that they would be allowed to operate from here and they would be allowed to operate from Chabahar Port, and no sanctions would be placed on the entities, Indian entities in this context. But back in October 2025, that is last year, it's not that long, 4 months back itself, US came ahead and said that we are not going to give sanction waiver, we are not going to allow any facilitation in Iran, and we are withdrawing that sanction waiver. Now that would be a problem because we have already invested so much in this particular port, and it is strategically very important for us in terms of access, because another alternative route after this would be via Suez Canal. That will not only increase the time, that will also increase the threats, because if you talk about Red Sea, piracy issues are present there. Time would be increased, logistic cost would be increased, premium would be increasing, insurance would be increasing, and that would cost more for India. That is detrimental for India's trade, and that is why we also emphasize on the importance of Chabahar Port. Now in this context, when US set in with removal of sanction waiver in October 2025, there was a conversation and finally US agreed for a 6 months extension. When India got this 6 month extension, it was understood that this was being facilitated because of the strategic partnership. Now in a recent conference, our External Affairs Minister has gone ahead and told that US and India are working together to find a middle path because India won't leave Iran's Chabahar Port. So when we are talking about the extension that has been given, the waiver extension, that is only till April 2026, and this was considered as a special case so that India gets to wind up its operations, not to continue for long. But India has clarified here that we are going to stay, we are not going to leave, and government is already working into ways to remove exposure to US sanctions. So already Indian government is looking into options. So if we are talking about the Indian entity IPGL, it is the state-owned entity which is working at Chabahar Port. Now all government officials serving on the board of state-owned entity, they have resigned, and that is one way of reducing exposure of US sanctions, because recently US has also gone ahead and said they will be putting up 25% more tariffs on the countries which are trading with Iran. That means India is in that count as well. So this leaves India in a very difficult situation, and that is why it has been clarified that we are not leaving Iran's Chabahar Port after 6 months. That means April 2026 is not a deadline for us, and we are still in conversation with US officials to sort this whole situation out for us. Now when we are looking at this whole conversation, US is trying to use the strategic advantage that India is enjoying in Iran to make sure that India also does what it wants and Iran also gives into the demands that are being done by US. And this clearly shows us that Chabahar Port is a very important factor in whole of this conversation. So the next thing, now that we have a clarity on what exactly has been unfolding, now let us move to understand that why exactly Chabahar Port is very important. So this is one keyword you can pick up from right here, is the fact that this is a multinational gateway for India. It is strategically and geopolitically important because it allows us to bypass Pakistan, it allows us to keep a check on China and also counterbalance Chinese presence in Arabian Sea, and furthermore it strengthens our trade and presence in the Indian Ocean itself. Other than that, when we are talking about this particular route, we also have to understand that entry into Afghanistan is not just for trade, it is for humanitarian causes, for the aid that can be facilitated for redevelopment of Afghanistan, aid logistics which are required, development role that India has taken up in Afghanistan. Can you tell me in the comment section which are the certain big project, development role projects that India has taken up in Afghanistan? Even though India does not recognize the Taliban regime which is present in Afghanistan, India does understand that it is important to strategically engage with the Taliban regime, because if another neighbor is left out in the corner, that would be subsumed. And India also clearly wants to keep Iran also in the picture, because if Iran is left out, US is against it, then Iran would directly turn towards China and Russia. So India is also trying to counterbalance not just presence in Indian Ocean but also in Iran. Furthermore, in terms of connectivity, I have already explained it's a shorter route, it has better cost effectiveness, and this gives us a very clear access to Central Asian markets, which are comparatively new markets for us. But where this Chabahar port brings us enhanced influence, it also brings us a risk of sanctions, it also brings us the risk of balanced diplomacy that constantly India has to practice so as to ensure not only the access is maintained, the development in Chabahar port goes on, but also not to compromise whatever sort of relationship we have left with the US, so that we are not on their target list in a red bold sign itself. Now, as of now, what is happening from US's end is not only unilateral, that is coming from one side, but also it is extraterritorial, and that is why we have the risk of secondary sanctions, and that our Indian entities will be further targeted and the officials would also be targeted. And in recent time, as there is an added layer, as I told you, that there is the threat of 25% tariff on the countries which are involved in trade with Iran. Even though our trade as of now is 0.15% when we are looking in comparison to Iran trade, but the strategic cost of exit once we leave Chabahar port, that is going to be way more than the economic exposure that we are looking and that we are being threatened by Donald Trump as of now. And in this very context, it's also important to understand that what India is doing. India is rightly following two important things. First is the middle path, that they are making sure that neither they are going to exit nor they are going to openly defy US. They are making key adjustment where Indian government officials, they have already resigned from the IPGL board. They are reducing individual as well as state exposure. They are exploring sanction resilient operational structures, and they are in continuous engagement with US Treasury, US State Department, so as to ensure that dialogue does not die down and dialogue will deliver to ensure that sanction waiver might probably be extended again. So first thing that we are going to do is preserve the strategic presence without triggering further sanctions. And the second thing that we are focusing on, and we have been on that, is the strategic autonomy. We are not compromising on it, and India has rejected any third country veto on our sovereign matters, on our sovereign decisions. We are avoiding any sort of alliance entrapment that if we are with US, we have to do what US is wanting. And it is absolutely in line of multi-alignment, multipolarity, it is in line of issue-based partnerships, and we have already seen in 2018 that US has already exempted Chabahar despite Iran sanctions for India, and this might be done again. However, as of now, Chabahar port remains like a test for India, where India's leading power ambitions are still in question. This loss of this strategic asset is going to be a huge blow, but as of now, India is not bowing out of the fight. And as of this, we also get to see regional and global implications, where Iran will not drift towards Russia or China. The Iranian goodwill will be kept, especially where it can help us on international forays, especially when we are talking about Kashmir stance. It encourages alternative trade corridors, where India is already diversifying, and it also shows sanctions resilience. And this also adds to India that how a global South leader can push back, especially against coercive, forceful geopolitics, where the developed countries are trying to play puppet with the developing countries. Now that was all from my side. Now I'll be leaving you here with a practice question. You can put down your answers in the comment section. That was all from my end. Thank you so much.